Comic anthology magazines have been around since the 1930s, with one of the most known comic anthologies in the United Kingdom, the Beano, which was released in July 1938. It was hugely popular from its debut and became the beloved pride and joy of Scotland. Another comic anthology that is more modern than the Beano would be the Phoenix, that was released in January 2012. The Phoenix has been described as an enjoyably silly story magazine and is beautifully drawn. The Beano is one of the most well-known comic anthologies in the United Kingdom, as more than 3,500 issues have been created since its start in 1938. It's known as an iconic kids comic, and that it's never gone out of fashion. However, it's been stated by Emma Scott, the CEO of Beano Studios, that even if the Beano is still profitable, it only sells about 35,000 copies a week, which is a far cry from its prime in the 1950s where they sold 2 million. Even though it's obvious the Beano is less popular in the modern era compared to 1950s, the Beano still manages to sell a copy every 5 seconds in the United Kingdom as stated by their website. With all this in mind, it's safe to assume that the Beano is still popular. The Phoenix is seen as a phenomenon and could usher in a new golden age of comics. It has a wide range of different topics within the comics. Some are about historical adventures or monstrous tales. The Phoenix works on a subscription-based payment, where a parent would pay £1 for 6 issues as an introduction, and then $9.99 after that. Recently, they've been celebrating their 500th issue, which is free on the Phoenix website. The Phoenix has sold more than 100,000 comic books in mostly the United Kingdom, with small number of sales coming from Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. The creator of Phoenix, Tom Fickling, says that they try and make the comic artists feel that they have ownership over their work, and what they have created is recognised as their own. The Beano once targeted at young boys between the ages of 8 to 11, but is now regarded as gender neutral with a wide mix of male and female characters. Similarly to this, the Phoenix specifically targets both boys and girls from the ages of 7 to 14. The Phoenix doesn't just stick to one genre. It has comedy/humorous comic strips, which mostly appeal to young children, whereas the action/drama stories will appeal to older audiences, as well as some interesting historical comics. While no genre is specifically stated by the Beano, it can be assumed that the Beano favours humorous and satirical comics. In recent years, the Beano has revolutionised their brand to make it more appealing for the newest generation by creating their own website, Beano.com, as an entertainment platform. It has animation, sketch shows, quizzes, and short-form articles, as well as being in touch with their audience by harnessing data. However, with all of this in mind, it has a high success rate with over 1 million users visiting the site. Similarly, the Phoenix took a digital route too, not long after they first published, as they began selling their comics on iTunes, which meant they could hit a wider audience for those who couldn't afford to pay for shipping prices, mainly international readers. On the other hand, the Phoenix and Beano comics have taken two very different approaches when it comes to comic anthologies. The Phoenix is a weekly story comic, where lots of different stories are happening from different authors. This creates anticipation for the next magazine being released, as people are guaranteed that the story will continue. In contrast to this, the Beano are humour strips, which are one-off based comics that will have no continuation, as well as start and finish within the comic itself. Depending on what consumers want will influence which magazine they end up buying. A final contrast between the Phoenix and the Beano is their art styles. The Phoenix is filled with so many different artists and different comic strips that everyone can find something here, and there is so much to explore. As a result, it would help readers separate their stories from each other because of the changes in art. However, in the Beano, every magazine had the same art style across all its comic strips. Dennis and Gnasher, Minnie the Mink, the Bash Street Kids, Roger the Dodger, etc., etc. While this is not a bad thing, it can be repetitive and could push away any readers who didn't like the style. Also, it can make it harder for very young readers to figure out where the first comic ends and where the next one starts. Nevertheless, the familiar style will bring comfort and nostalgia to those reading. To wrap things up, the Phoenix and the Beano are two phenomenal and silly story magazines for girls or boys, with enough differences between the two that they feel like their own comic magazine. However, there is something they both agree on, which is that the new generation are digital natives, and that they should know that it's okay to be silly sometimes, and have a role to play in making people laugh, because that's what the comics have always done. Either way, having two sets of comic anthologies is great for getting the newer generation into comic reading, and potentially into comic creating themselves.